we're going to address, as you know, the new champions of competitiveness based on this document. There aren't actually many hard copies around because it's all available on the web, including much of the background data, drilling deep into how competitiveness and the scores were put together and compiled this year. It's been happening for about 3 decades. Just so you're aware, top of the list this year is Switzerland, followed by the United States. We're going to hear from 3 ministers, the Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam, the Minister of Trade for Costa Rica, and also the Vice Prime Minister, Minister of Finance and Economic Development for Mauritius. And we also have our expert to try and shed light and clarify some of the complex details of how this scoring was done. Yoko Ishikura, who's been involved in compiling the Competitiveness Report, which only came out 3 days ago, who's professor of the Graduate School of International Corporate Strategy at Hitotsubashi University, as well as being involved on the Global Agenda Council on the skills gap, which obviously is going to report or move forward on its work in Dubai in just under 2 months. So that's the framework. We've got 3 nations here represented who've been moving forward, who've shown what competitiveness can be achieved and how restructuring can be done. And this is an enlightening session for you to hear how they've been doing it, to give clues as to the difficulties, and also how they've achieved what they have done. But first of all, Yoko, a long list of 133 nations, yes, topped by Switzerland with Burundi at the end. Scores from 7 to 0, a bit like ice skating. The highest, Switzerland has 5.6, Burundi has 2.58. I'm not going to read the other 131. You'll be glad to hear, but you can, if you're online, you can get it there if you really want to drill down. But I think, Yoko, we do need to hear about how these scores have been assembled, what data you've been using, what pillars, as you call it, the 12 pillars you've been using, so we have an idea. Also, where the data has come from and the timeline, because obviously it's been a very complex year for competitiveness, for economic development, with the recession and the great difficulties every nation has been going through. What was the, if you like, the drop-dead moment for the data, where it's coming from, and where the timeline took us? Okay. So before we hear from each of the countries, Yoko, your explanation of the scores and so on.
Okay. Well, Global Competitiveness Score is...
Could you just put the microphone up a little bit?
Sure.
Closer to you.
Is it better?
Is it better?
Okay. Global Competitiveness Scores are determined by 12 pillars, and 12 pillars include institutions, infrastructure, macroeconomic stability, health and primary education, which is like a basic requirements to determine the competitiveness and the productivity of the country, and the higher education and training, goods market efficiency, labor market efficiency, financial market sophistication, technological readiness, and market size. And last but not least, business sophistication and innovation. So these are the 12 pillars which consist the competitiveness scores, which is like from 0 to 7 or whatever. And the thing is, these scores are determined by both hard data as well as the results of the economic executive opinion survey. So those are the soft data, or the opinions and the views of the business executives of that particular country. And the timeline is that because the data is not available today for the 2009 competitiveness report, the hard data comes from the year 2008. And the executive opinion survey that we collect from all over the world is it was collected from like March to May. So the deadline is like May last year, 2008. And one additional point that I would like to make is that even though we're talking about those 12 pillars, they're not isolated. They're interrelated with each other. What I mean by that is that unless you have an institutions and institutions which determine the rules of the game, of the competition and the productivity, you really cannot have a very good business or the productivity. But even though you do have the good institutions and infrastructure, which means roads and transportation and so forth, unless you have educated workforce, both primary as well as higher education, you cannot really become productive and innovative over the long run.
Can I just be clear? When
Sure.
you said May, you mean May of this year, not of 2008, for the last data, correct?
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And one other thing about the relative scores here, going up, going down, is it because countries have become stronger or other countries have become weaker? And does it matter which order they're in?
I think it depends upon both ways, and because this is relative, and so some countries become much higher in terms of ranking because others didn't do that well. And I think that Switzerland is the good case. The US used to be #1, but they didn't do that well this past year, so they went down to the #2. One of the things which I really would like to emphasize, though, is that when we talk about competitiveness, we often think of the zero-sum game. But this is the competitiveness ranking and competitiveness scores is like a benchmark. And I think that's meant for much more of the long term rather than year to year kind of things. So even though we sort of become happy or sad depending upon whether we go up and down, but I think what we really should focus on is the long-term trend. And I think the long-term trend in relative terms really captures what kind of things, what kind of policies and institutions and institutional reforms are in place, as well as how sophisticated the businesses are.
And finally, on the methodology, those 12 pillars, are you able to measure the interrelationship of the pillars?
I don't think we are able to quantify it per se, but everything is related to each other in a way, and each pillar consists of several indexes. And the indices and hard data, as well as the responses to the executive opinion surveys. So it's a composite score, which is related to each other.
All right. What I'd like to hear from the ministers, this is your chance to explain why you think you've done well. How are you defining success from your perspective to complement what we're seeing in the competitiveness score? How have you been fostering development? Which policies have you been using? Which have worked, which have not worked? How are you developing your policy frameworks? And in particular, what did you decide was not applicable or appropriate to follow policy-wise at this moment? And finally, what could derail it all, in addition to what we've been through in the last year? So let's go to Vietnam first, to Hoang Trung, who's the Deputy Prime Minister. The floor is yours. And then I'm going to go to Yoko for a reflection on anything you might want to add.
Thank you. Well, in the case of Vietnam, we would say that we didn't do it well. And we're very sad to look at the competitiveness report, because we ranked 75 out of 133, and we were down to the same report in 2007, about 5 positions. That's come back to the end of the year 2007, where we were facing the inflation. The government was tackle the inflation with 5 measures, and is coming to the beginning of 2008, and we actually squeeze all the monetary sort of policies, and we cut the government spendings, and we limit the investment to control down the inflation rate. But to the middle of the 2008, we face the influence, the impact of the world crisis. So we have to do the opposite. In 2008, we will bring down a little bit of the inflation rate, but we start, slow down in terms of the GDP, and we have to, loosen our monetary policies, and at the same time, we got to control the inflation rate. So the inflation was 20% 2007, 12 in 2008, and this year we try to come up with the figures of less than 10%. With the policies one is to protect the country, the macro economic stability from the inflation. We at the same time making the stimulus package to the various sectors in order to boost the growth of the economy and to supply more employment to the society, to assure the livelihood of the people, the poor people in a rural area, and to continue to make the investment in our infrastructures and training and education system where we wake up. The government is actually finding the better sort of improvement to the second quarter of this year. And we're starting to pick up 3.9% on the half of the year of the GDP, and the growth of the export, which is, is about 14% reduction during the crisis, is coming back. And the FDI is realized something like $10 billion for the first half of the year. So overall, the result of this year is estimated to be 5 to 5.2%. And we think that we can achieve a figure of 5 to 6.5% in 2010. Now, we're feeling that the crisis was hitting the economy so hard, so we will have to continue to perform our policies and to make the great investment into the infrastructure, into the reform of our administration system, our institution system, and also education system. By doing that, we face the shortage of current investment. We're working at the moment with the World Bank and the ADB to develop the model of the public-private partnerships. And we hope to attract more foreign direct investment to make the investment in improve our infrastructure system, both hard and also soft system. We will not be able to achieve the growth in the economy and cannot reduce the gap of the poor and the rich during the countries if we cannot just overcome all the weaknesses. Especially, we make the big emphasis on the education of our workforce. At the moment, 54% of our workforce is in the agriculture area, whereby the sector itself is contributing only 20% of GDP. So they will need to be transited into the services and also the industry sort of sectors, but a lot of training will need to be done. At the moment, it's about 40% of our labor force is trained. We lack of also the high-skilled labor as well. So it's a number of issues that mentioned in the competitiveness reports that we would have to overcome. Otherwise, it's difficult for Vietnam to move forward.
Have you pulled back from any specific policies? Have you made any mistakes, or are there things you would prefer you hadn't have done?
Well, that's the good question. That's the issues of argument within our countries as well, because we base our development on the export, model. So our export is about 70% of GDP, and import and export totally is about 160% of GDP. But by stimulating the domestic demand, we cannot recover all the export market that we have lost during the crisis because of the level of income of people in the rural areas is still low, and we would have to stimulate it. It's going to take time to get to that. So instead of people saying that we will have to change our model from the export-oriented into the domestic-oriented, we stimulating the intra-ASEAN and Asia trade in order to overcome that and to reduce the dependency on the market like the United States and the EU and the Japanese market. Those two big markets is covering about 80% of our exports. So we will continue to apply the export growth model But at the same time, we will have to stimulate our domestic demand and intra-ASEAN and intra-Asia sort of trading.
And anything else you wish you'd done differently?
Yeah, we can boost. As I said, that 2009 we're going to achieve a figure of 5 and 5.2%. That's the result of that.
Good.
You know?
Right, Yoko, your reflection when you look at the data and maybe some of the weaknesses you've identified as well.
Sure. Okay. I think it's a great idea for the Vietnam to focus on the region rather than just domestic and or export. And one of the things which I think is a very good foundation is that they have a very good, efficient labor market, which is very difficult to establish early on. And I think that will work forever, you know, over the long run. So in that sense, I think they have a very good foundation in place. Some of the weaknesses, as Minister mentioned, is that the infrastructure, you still have quite a bit of work for the infrastructure and the health of the workforce and higher education and training, even though you have some primary education in place. So in order to sort of regional export and the domestic demand model, you really need to enhance the level of education. And I think the biggest thing, as you mentioned, is the macro stability that you have to achieve over the long run. And that's always the challenge because you're faced with the immediate crisis. And what do? But I think this global competitiveness ranking is a very good way of benchmarking to think about the long term rather than just, you know, what do we do this year in relation, you know, in the face of the economic crisis.
Do you accept those observations, Deputy Prime Minister? And so how are you going to combat some of those issues that Yoko has highlighted of the weaknesses?
Well, as I said, that you know we will face the difficulties of mobilizing funds for the infrastructure. Infrastructure is going to need long-term investment, but the country is die of that. So we will have to apply the new model of the investment, not just like coming from the government. The government budget is very limited. So the better the model we have, the better we can absorb the private, you know, investors and the foreign direct investor. You know, otherwise it's difficult to develop that.
Right. I should say at this point, we've got about 40 minutes to run. If there are representatives of any other nations who are listed in the competitiveness report and you'd like to join in the discussion, please make sure I know well in advance so we can focus on your country as well, because obviously countries have been moving up and down with different scores and different signals of success and maybe not such straightforward success. Let's move to Mauritius now, to Rami Sithanen, who is Vice Prime Minister and also Minister of Finance and Economic Empowerment. Your explanation of how things have moved in the right direction for you and also where things haven't perhaps gone as well as you had hoped.
Thank you, Nick. We had built a development paradigm based on trade preferences, which was quite successful because for those of you who know Mauritius, sugar, textile and clothing are extremely important pillars in our economic development. Both have been affected because of preference erosion. The multi-fiber agreement has disappeared and the EU has had to reform its sugar regime. So 4 to 5 years ago, we had to find a new development model. At the same time, there was some inflexibility in some factor markets, the labor markets, the goods market, and there were also some macroeconomic instability. The fiscal deficit as a share of GDP was quite high, and the debt as a share of GDP also was quite high. So we were against the wall. And Mauritius has always been adapting to these challenges in a very flexible and in a very pragmatic way. So what we did was basically to reform, one, the doing business environment, to carry out a very thorough fiscal reform, and at the same time to remove rigidities in the labor market and to address the macroeconomic instability. Let me give you a couple of examples of what we tried to do. We do realize that we need to attract foreign direct investment. So we have changed the business climate considerably in order to attract business. For instance, it used to take about 40 days to get a license approved or to get a permit approved. We have introduced what we call a silent agreement principle, that if you meet some ex-ante guidelines that are issued, and if the authority doesn't object in 3 working days, you can start your business. We have also reformed our taxation completely from a very complex, complicated taxation, where there were a lot of carve-outs for industries, to a simple, transparent, and rule-based taxation. So we've gone for a single rate of taxation, 15%, 1.5 for income tax, for corporate tax. We have also opened up the economy. And at the same time, we have removed some of the rigidities in the labor market. And I think this has not been factored in probably in the report, because we've just enacted this legislation to make the labor market more flexible, and at the same time to give some additional security to people who would lose their job. So as a result of these bold reform measures that we have introduced, we've been able to reverse the declining macroeconomic instability. The deficit as a share of GDP now is about 3%, notwithstanding the fact that we have introduced 2 additional stimulus packages as a result of the global economic downturn, representing approximately 4% of GDP. So we have been able to reverse the declining trend in growth. The debt to GDP ratio has come down. The deficit as a share of GDP also has come down. And in spite of tourism and textile having been affected, because we have diversified the economic base into new pillars. We have diversified into financial services, into global business, into ICT and BPO, into real estate. The other sectors have compensated for the decline that we have experienced in tourism. And as a result, the growth is going to be about 3%. The good thing is that we have focused a lot of our attention in the last year on saving jobs and protecting people. Because we know that if people lose a job, this can create both social instability and political instability. So we have created more jobs, and unemployment, in fact, is on a declining trend. Now, what could derail this? I think, first, domestically, that we need to accelerate investment in infrastructure. Second, we need to sustain our investment in tertiary education, because the next development lab that Mauritius will run is to transform the economy into a service or a knowledge-based economy. I mean, I forgot to tell you that Mauritius started the game with 3 disadvantages. We don't have any inherited factor endowments. We have no gold, we have no diamond. Second, we are also geographically very isolated. We are very far from our main trading partners. And 3, we have a very small market size, 1.2 million people. So our development battle constantly has been, how do we overcome these 3 constraints? And we have had to adapt very often. As I mentioned earlier on, we built a very strong economy based on trade preferences. These are gone. And now we are trying, to build an economy that will be driven by global competitiveness by doing 2 things. Revisiting all sectors of the economy to transform them in order to meet the challenges of the modern economy, and 2, to add more pillars. Let me give you one example. We used to export raw sugar to London, and it was refined there. We don't do this anymore. We transform the raw sugar into refined sugar, into white sugar, and into special sugar in order to add value. So we have transformed the sugar sector into a cane cluster within 5 years. We use one of the byproducts of sugar to generate electricity, which is renewable energy. And we use another byproduct of sugar to manufacture ethanol. And then we use another byproduct of sugar to produce high value added alcohol. So this is the transformation that has taken place in the last 5 years from sugar to cane. We've done the same thing in textile and clothing. There is no way that we can compete in the high volume, low value end of the market. So we have transformed the industry. It's more vertically integrated. It's consolidated, and we've gone into niche market. This is basically what we have done. The same thing for tourism. Many people tell me that Mauritius is a beautiful seaside resort. True. But now we are transforming it from tourism to hospitality sector. And let me give you 3 concrete examples. Now, many people now come to Mauritius to play golf. We have built 5 or 6 beautiful world-class golf courses. We are also attracting people who want to invest in real estate in Mauritius. So if you buy a property worth $500,000 US, you become a resident of Mauritius. And 3, we are diversifying into wellness. People who come to Mauritius, that could indulge in wellness activities. So on the one hand, we are transforming the historical sectors of the economy, and on the other hand, we are adding new pillars. And these new pillars are the ICT BPO sector. And the other thing that we would like to build also is to make Mauritius as a platform, as a bridgehead between East Asia and Africa, because some of the competitive advantage that we have in Mauritius.
Vice Minister, one of the things which is important in the competitiveness report, as you move towards innovation, as you've just said, is what they compliment you for. You're the 2nd highest on scores in sub-Saharan Africa, but for strong and transparent public institutions and private institutions rated as accountable and improving. How much have you realized that that is critical if you move forward and have aspirations of moving forward in the way that you have just outlined?
Let me give you one example on how we have been able to weather the economic downturn. Right from day one, we realized that we need a strong partnership between the private sector and the public sector. So in designing, implementing, reviewing, and monitoring the stimulus packages that we have introduced, we have worked in close collaboration with the private sector. Now, the private sector accounts for about 80% of GDP, so it makes sense also to implicate the private sector in the design, the implementation, and the monitoring of all the measures that we have introduced. For instance, we have set up 11 subcommittees, and in each of these subcommittees, we have 2 co-chairs, one from the public sector and one from the private sector. And institutions also are extremely important. We pride ourselves on very independent, transparent, and accountable institutions.
Well, that's what the report talks about. But Yoko, just give us an update on where maybe the hints of negativity have crept in as well.
Sure. Well, Mauritius was ranked 57th this year, and it's the same ranking as last year. And one of the things is that even though they, as the Vice Minister mentioned, there are a lot of things in place or enacted, but it really hasn't been reflected in the ranking yet, because you set up the law, but it hasn't quite penetrated into that. And I think one of the things which is remarkable about Mauritius is that it's always very difficult for the country to go through the transformation from the efficiency to innovation economy. And I think that's the challenge that you're dealing with. At the same time, however, I think you have heard that there are remarkable things that they have done to overcome 3 disadvantages. And I think the question remains whether they can continue doing a good job in terms of the education and other things. At the same time, I think in order to transform itself from the efficiency-driven economy to innovation, as you mentioned, as the Vice Minister mentioned, you really have to have a very good private sector, sort of a group of companies rather than 1 or 2. And I think that's what you're working on. And I think in the audience, there are quite a few people in the private sector. And I think there are a lot of things that the private sector companies could do in order to make the economy transform from the efficiency economy to innovation economy. And without the help and the support of the private sector, I think it's going to be very difficult to do.
Fair comment, Vice Prime Minister.
I think it's a fair comment, but we are addressing these challenges. For instance, for tertiary education, what the specialists call the gross tertiary enrollment ratio, which was 28%. This means that every young boy or young girl in the age of 19 to 25, how many of them go to tertiary education? It used to be 28%. In 4 years, this statistics has risen to 42%. And in the last budget, I've put funds in order to double the capacity of 2 universities so that in 4 years' time, the gross tertiary enrollment ratio will rise to 75%. Because we do realize if we want to transform Mauritius into a knowledge and a service economy, we have to invest a lot in tertiary education. The point is well taken also in infrastructure, especially in the service industry. With respect to the private sector, we have always had a very strong risk-taking and entrepreneurial private sector. What we're trying to do now is to broaden the circle of opportunities so as to bring new business into the economy.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, let me just check. Is there anyone from one of the countries listed here who would like to say a few words later on? Because I just need to know when we go to Costa Rica that there are others out there who would like specifically to speak to their score or ranking in the competitiveness report. I'll be with you shortly after Costa Rica. Good. Right. Let's go to Marco Ruiz, who is Minister of Foreign Trade for Costa Rica.
Thank you, Nick. Well, I think we have done remarkable well in the last 8 or 6 years. Since 2006, we had improved 13 places in the competitiveness indicator. And that is very important because it seems to me that we have enjoyed 100 years of democracy, the longest and most stable democracy in Latin America, but at the same time, economic stability. The crisis that we suffered in the 80s gave us we learned our lesson. From that crisis, we integrated our economy with the world. Right now, in 1976-80, 75% of our exports were mainly tropical products, commodities. Right now, 85% of our exports are high technology products, industrial products, and the commodity side is around 10 to 15%, and we are leading, even in agriculture, we have leading producers of products like pineapples, bananas, and high-quality coffee. But we have changed that much. I mean, our portfolio right now is 4,000 products to 152 markets. For a small country like our country, it gives you an idea that we are very diversified. Then our export right now, we have one of the highest per capita export in the region, more than $2,000 per every person. FDI, foreign direct investment has played a very important role because we integrate foreign direct investment in our developing strategy. And we have the kind of companies that can really help us developing technology and taking advantage of our most important pillar, which is the training in our educational system, our labor force. It is important that for you to know that our country has free education even until the state paid until the university, have a universal health system, which is, we have 78 years of life expectancy, which is as good as any developed country, and it's state-run. And that's even banking system. We do have 50% of our banking is state-owned, which gave us a lot of strength in the financial crisis. First, we didn't have to privatize any private bank, and at the same time, it was ready to help and to provide funds for small and medium businesses and to help our social net. The most important transformation in the past 5 to 10 years has been not only attracting companies of very, very high developed companies like Intel, Procter & Gamble, Hospira, Baxter, but we have one of the highest, one of the most important tourism. In fact, the term ecotourism was developed in Costa Rica, and this is very diversified. Service economy, We are taking advantage of our good English-speaking people, and at the same time, business services has grown very much. HP, Hewlett-Packard, that started 5 years ago with 100 employees, today it has 8,000 employees in business services alone. So that gives us economy a different view. I think for us, the key location is very important. Being in the middle of America, it gives you access to the North American market, but to oceans and to South America. And we now working very hard to finish trade agreements with the European Union and with People's Republic of China that we are on the 4th round. So we just have a mixture of having trade 35% with North America, 20% with a regional market, Central America, another 20% with Europe, and 20% with Asia. So that is very important to really help us very much in this economic crisis. I think good areas, as a summary, the 100 years of democracy, the state policy regarding international trade and the rule of law have led us to the good governance standards, and the quality of education is very high, especially in very technical and research institutions. The diversify of economy, it helps us very much because we don't have any particular, the most important product, it's only account for 15 to 16% of our total export. So we do not depend on any commodities or in any mine products or oil. And second, I think the high-tech sector has been developed quite well. We are one of the few countries to have a surplus with People's Republic of China regarding high-tech product, for instance. What are the problems that we have now, how we can really move ahead? First, we were hit by inflation last year because there was a mixture of two problems at the same time. First, do you remember, everyone remember that the crisis started with the food increment, all the prices of food because of, we import corn, we import soybeans, we import some of the key issues, key products. Second, the oil crisis, because we depend a lot for public transportation, not for energy, because in energy, 90% of the energy is renewable. We have hydroelectric energy most. So, but we were hit at the same time with the two issues, so inflation went up. Now it's under control, fortunately. Infrastructure, still, we had been very low implementing, let's say, concession ports or airports. So we are moving faster on that. This year, we were approved $180 and $50 million long-term loan from the International Development Bank for infrastructure. So the whole program of infrastructure building will be for the next 5 years is ready. And I think the most important issue right now is we are undergoing a major program of the digital government, which is very important to expedite all procedures in the public sector, which is one of the areas that is really of concern of the business people there. Okay.
Minister, thank you. You've answered all the questions. I don't need to ask any more. Thank you. So, Yoko, can you just reflect on where more work needs to be done and the signals you've got from the indices?
Yeah. Costa Rica is a very interesting case because it was successful in transforming itself from the factor-driven economy like coffee and bananas and all that to ecotourism, which is the very unique word. And they have a very unique development strategy for the country. And I think they did it, they transformed itself to the efficiency-driven economy by inviting a lot of investment, such as Intel and P&G and so forth, and transformed itself from much more from factor-driven, resource-driven to high-tech driven economy. And I thought what was very interesting is that this attempt for the digital government, because if we take a look at the global competitiveness scores for this year, the problematic factors for doing business still is inefficient government bureaucracy. So, I mean, by making it digitized, I think there will be quite a bit of improvement. There is. And one of the things which impresses me about Costa Rica is that the quality of education and transparency and things like that. And and also the capitalizing the geographical location of having a very clear idea where they are positioned. And I think that's true with all these three countries, Vietnam, Mauritius, and Costa Rica. They're very much aware of the uniqueness of their geographical location and try to serve as a gateway or combine the two different areas. And I think that's geographical location for the country plays a very significant role for the future.
Minister, institutional inefficiency.
Yeah, this is the most important issue we face today. We have to learn.
Are you working on it?
Yeah, well, I think the key factor here, by learning from countries in Asia, I mentioned that we have 100 years democracy, but unfortunately, it's not, the decisions are not as fast as we need it. So we have to work on that. There's a trade-off between being highly developed democracy and taking decision on time. Whenever you have to ask everyone, it takes time. So this is one of the things, in order to compete now better, we have to find ways, even by, like the Swiss does right now, that they consult everything over the internet. Right. I mean, we have to find ways to have better democracy, but at the same time, faster. And that's the challenge we have ahead.
All right, let's move on. We've got about 10, 12 minutes to run. Let me turn to Arthur Mutambara, young global leader, now Deputy Prime Minister of Zimbabwe. I do have the indices here, Arthur. You've got them too, but it does make interesting reading because a year from now, I would like to ask you, with all the unique challenges of Zimbabwe, how you think these indices might change. And I see that the European Union is moving towards sending a delegation, which is a real opening of a very important door. But on macroeconomic stability, your score is 1, which is 133rd, which is the last. And there are many of these indices which tragically, where the numbers are extremely low, as you're about to tell me, on labor market efficiency, on goods market efficiency, on technological readiness, and on market size. But as everyone in Zimbabwe will say, there's enormous potential. Tell us how you're going to get the rating of Zimbabwe up in the next year.
Thank you very much. I'll start by explaining our score. We are a factor-driven economy, a resource-based economy. And if you look at the basic requirements, which is the first bucket of drivers, we were doing very badly last year and a number of years before then. Our institutions were not working. There was macroeconomic instability. There was political instability in the country. Our infrastructure was unaffordable. It was not available. And also the healthcare and primary education were problematic. This is why we are number 132 out of 133, because the key drivers for a factor-driven economy were all dysfunctional in our country. But as of the 11th of February this year, we're doing something now about political stability. We now have a coalition government, which is a government bringing together the opposition and the ruling party then into a new arrangement. And so we hope that going forward, we're going to work on our macroeconomic stability, work on our political stability, and be able to work on infrastructure, water, telecoms, electricity, housing, and transportation. So we hope that in the next year, when we look at these numbers, we're going to be doing well in that bucket of issues under basic requirements. Now, in terms of efficiency enhancers, in spite of the challenges in the basic bucket of issues, we actually have some banks, some companies, there's innovation going on, there's business sophistication. So in spite of the key drivers for our area, we have companies that were able to make real money in spite of the crisis. So if we fix our issues in the first bucket, we are likely to do very well because our people, our companies were able to survive the crisis in spite of the circumstances. So we're going to have a combination of success from the basic requirements, efficiency enhancers, and also from innovation. We are also going to migrate our economy from primary products to value addition, to beneficiation, and hopefully we'll be able to attract foreign direct investment from Europe, from Asia, from everywhere, and we're also going to be able to attract domestic investment. We have the potential. Why? Because of our rich resource base, because of our excellent human capital, and also because our industrial base is very broad. And also our ability to absorb capital, absorptive capacity is much higher than most African countries. So we're looking forward to the scores next year, where we're going to do very well.
Well, let me press you, because maybe you or one of your colleagues will be up here on the platform or at this time next year celebrating your move up from 132nd. But at the South Africa Summit, or the Africa Summit, I think it was 3 years ago, we had a senior figure from the World Bank at a difficult time in Zimbabwe who said that he believed, he said it on one of our programs for the BBC, that Zimbabwe could raise its game economically significantly within 3 to 5 years. How quickly do you believe you can make a significant inroad into some of these very low scores?
I think the most important thing is for us to get the foundation right. Get inflation down, get production going. Right now in our industries, we have capacity utilization of the level of 15%, 20% capacity utilization. We need to work on capacity utilization, work on infrastructure, water, telecommunication, power, transportation, and housing. And also work on jobs, job creation, disposable incomes, money supply in the country. We can move quickly if there is solid political stability in the country, if there is solid macroeconomic stability, then the other things will follow in place. And if investors believe in us, if we build confidence in the country, if we're credible as a government, we need to walk the talk in the country in terms of our seriousness around unity, our seriousness around implementing the global political agreement, our seriousness around political reforms, media reforms, political reforms, new constitution, national healing. We'll be able to move in 2 to 3 years if the foundation is set, and we are determined to do just that.
And just to be clear, we've been hearing about the plans of at least 3 countries and how they've come to fruit. Do you have a clear timeline, subject to the political challenges of your government? Do you have a clear timeline of what you think is achievable and when?
Yeah, we have 3 plans. The first one is the short-term plan, which is running for a year. Then we have a medium-term plan, which is for 5 years. Then we're working on a long-term vision, which is a 30-year vision. We believe that it's important to have clarity on where you want to be in 30 years' time. We are also rebranding the country. We are known for the wrong things. We're known for fraudulent elections. We're known for corruption. We want to be known as a safe destination for investment. We want to be known as a high-return destination for investment. So rebranding the country, long-term vision, medium-term plan, and a short-term plan. So within the medium-term plan, we expect to be moving up into the top hundreds. I mean, at least 90, 80 numbers within 3 years.
All right, we won't hold you to that, but it's a useful measure for those of us who will remember that in 2 or 3 years' time. Arthur, thank you. Anyone else want to come in from any other nation? Yoko, do you want to just reflect on,
Sure.
on that kind of aspiration
Sure.
from a country which has had its extraordinary challenges and now does appear to have a stable currency, the dollar, does appear to have at least a fair wind in many respects, not all at the moment?
I think your focus on the foundation, and particularly like people and so forth, is very important over the long run. And I think it's a great idea to have a long-term plan, and rather than being affected by whatever happens yesterday and today or tomorrow kind of things. And one of the things is that, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the competitiveness ranking is perceived as a sort of a zero-sum game, but it's not really so. It's not, I mean, everybody can go up. But this is a relative ranking. It's a benchmark for the long term to figure out how you can increase your productivity of the country so that the people in your country can have a better standard of living and so forth. So that's one. And the other is that I think that particularly at the time of the economic downturn, or when you're faced with a lot of challenges, as you mentioned, the public policy makers are under a lot of pressure domestically. So they need, better jobs and better life and so forth. At the same time, you have to do a lot of infrastructure type of things as well, sort of firefighting. And I think the competitiveness ranking can serve as a benchmark so that you don't lose sight of, which direction you're going. And in that sense, I think it's, we're really, I hope that you will come up here 2 or 3 years from now and tell us about your success story, so that you can inspire.
Let's, in these final
everybody else.
moments, ask for a reflection from all three ministers. Deputy Prime Minister from Vietnam, of course, given what you have gone through in your history, national history, given where Zimbabwe is at the moment, any thoughts from each of you of the kind of absolute priorities which are needed at this stage in moving forward on competitiveness?
Well, I would say that all the issues have been mentioned by our folks over there. The point is that, you know, the government would have to ensure that all the measures that have been implemented correctly and following up and have the feedback from the society, from the private sector, from the foreign direct investment in order to correct the policies, you know, in a time manner. You know, this is all the government have, you know, very, very good policies, but it tend to lack of the implementation measures. So I think that, you know, the measure is there, but how we implement it effectively is the issues that the government would have to, you know, pay much attention on that.
Vice Prime Minister, you're second highest in sub-Saharan Africa. Could you see Zimbabwe giving you a hard run in a few years?
Yeah, look, we have always had faith in our friends from Zimbabwe. I mean, let me remind the audience, Zimbabwe used to be the breadbasket, you know, of that particular region. It's resource rich, and its people are very educated. The infrastructure used to be very good. I personally believe, and I've told that to my good friend, that they need to sort out, you know, the political situation. And once they sort out this political situation, I have absolutely no doubt that Zimbabwe, you know, will rise. And Zimbabwe has a very important role to play in the region, because I think one of the policy responses to address some of the problems in the region is to move the process of regional integration, and Zimbabwe has an important role to play there.
Minister, your reflection.
I think I have a great concern how the world is taking the problem of protectionism. For a small country like ours, like Zimbabwe, like Mauritius, it's very important to rely on an international system of trade. And I have seen very concerned the problems that we are having right now. That will delay the recovery of the economy very much. So this is very important. We relied on the international market. We rely on trade. We are small economies. We need to integrate more in the world. And the world has to really keep the markets open. And that's my
Thank you.
concern.
Anyone burning to say anything before I wrap up the session? Anyone who's got their own experiences of competitiveness who wants to challenge anything? I think that's it. Well, thank you very much indeed. Can I tell you that there are now a large number of these reports if you want them, and you can't go online to get your own electronic version. Ministers, thank you very much indeed, and Yoko too. Thank you.